Welcome students, हम डिस्कस कर रहे हैं the third numerical from the exercise for the chapter mechanical properties of solids. So let's start. Now the question says we have a body of mass 37 kilograms resting on a rough horizontal surface. The minimum horizontal force required to just start the motion of this body is 68.5 newtons. And in order to keep this body moving with a constant velocity, a force of 43 Newton is to be applied all the time. Then, what is the value of A, coefficient of static friction, and B, coefficient of kinetic friction? Now, this is a pretty straightforward and easy question if you understand the concepts of friction, and I hope you do. So, we have a body resting on a horizontal surface, and if we wish to move this body, a minimum force of 68.5 Newton must be applied. This means that the maximum value of static friction must be 68.5 newtons. So this gives us the first quantity from our question, that is the value of static friction or the maximum value of static friction. We represent it as FL, and that is said to be 68.5 newtons. Keep in mind, the maximum value of static friction is also called as the limiting force of static friction, hence the symbol FL. इसके अलावा क्वेश्चन में एक और फोर्स के बारे में इंफॉर्मेशन दिया है. सो व्हेन वी हैव आवर बॉडी मूविंग, so we know that a constant kinetic friction is applied on that body. And if we wish to continue the movement of this body, then we must apply a counter force to this frictional force. And this counter force has to be of 43 newtons, which means that the value of kinetic friction must also be equal to 43 newtons, which fetches us the second given value, that is the value for the kinetic friction Fk as 43 newtons. इसके अलावा हमें दिया है the mass of the body as 37 kilograms, and we also will be using the value for g. So we state that the value for g will be using is as 9.8 meters per second square. This is a common value for g. I hope आप सबको ये याद होगा. Now using these information, हमसे पूछा है to first calculate the value for coefficient of static friction. We represent it as mu s. And second, the coefficient of kinetic friction, we represent it as mu k. Now let's try to understand what formulas we can use. Well, the formula to calculate the coefficient of static friction is said to be the limiting force of static friction, Fl, divided by the normal reaction. Now we know that our body is resting on a horizontal surface. So in this case, our normal reaction is simply mass times acceleration due to gravity. So FL by mg. And now if you notice, FL, m and g ka value is given to us. So it's a pretty simple substitution to calculate the value of mu s. Now let's try to understand the formula to calculate the value for coefficient of kinetic friction mu k. And this is said to be kinetic friction divided by the normal reaction, which in this case normal reaction is just mg. So fk divided by mg, and हमें fk, m and g का value भी available है. So simple substitution to get the value of mu k as well. So let's do the substitution. So in our calculation we write from formula 1, which is the formula to calculate coefficient of static friction, mu s. So we say mu s is equal to the value of Fl, that is 68.5, divided by the mass, that is 37, into 9.8, that is the value of g. Now, in your college or during your exams, you will have to use logs strictly. So I'm going to write use logs for calculations, but in the video, we'll skip that step and directly arrive at the answer. And if you were to divide 68.5 by 37 into 9.8, you would get 0.1889. And this is the value for mu s, that is the coefficient of static friction. So हमने part 1 of our numerical कर दिया है, that is to calculate mu s. Now let's quickly calculate or solve the part 2. So from formula 2, we can get the value for coefficient of kinetic friction. So we say mu k is equal to now the value of Fk, that is 43. So 43 divided by 37 into 9.8. Now again, for your exams, you will have to use logs. Okay, logs for calculation, but for simplicity and for video purposes, we'll directly arrive at our answer. So if you were to divide 43 by 37 into 9.8, you would get the answer as 0.1186. So this is the value for mu k, which is the coefficient of kinetic friction, and this is the second half of our numericals. So from the question, I can say the coefficient of static friction is 0.1889 and coefficient of kinetic friction is 0.1186. That's it. If you want the PDF of the solution, make sure to check the link given in the description. Have a nice day.